Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. The motion I moved is the opening paragraph in Robert Gottliebsen's newspaper article yesterday. I'll quote it again. When China declared that Australia had been evil, it suddenly became clear that the dispute between the two nations is more deep-seated than a trade spat involving wine, coal, timber, etc. Now, as a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, who is involved in the governance of Australia, I want to focus on Gottliebsen's meaty fourth paragraph. Quote, "From President Xi down, there has been little respect for Australia for a long time, and many in China believe we are a foolish country that makes mistakes at almost every turn, led by defence." End of quote. He then details serious flaws in governance in 3 defence projects, the submarine Chamozzle, as he calls it, F-35 Joint Strike Fighter and Hunter frigates. We are a foolish country, obviously, from this, and the obvious point of his article is shoddy governments over many decades, both Liberal, National and Labor. People in this country are feeling concerned about the seriously deteriorating state of our country. We have lost our economic sovereignty. We're losing our national sovereignty. We're plunging towards catastrophe economically and dependence with a complete loss of security. People are fed up, and across many communities and industries are feeling dispirited, hopeless, confused, aimless, wary and concerned, even fearful, because most can sense our country's destruction, and I mean right around the country. Yet, 100 years ago, Australia was #1 in the world in income per person and had the highest GDP, gross domestic product, per person. There's a worse aspect beyond economic demise, though. Bullies, like China, prey on those perceived as being weak. Gottliebsen rightly says that due to poor and even stupid decisions, we're rightly perceived as being weak in defence. Yet he barely scratches the full extent of the deterioration of our security, because our productive capacity has been dismantled and our economic security smashed, destroyed, and we are vulnerable. Now, as a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, that is what I will discuss, because, like bullies in a schoolyard or in a workplace, China preys on those it perceives as weak or foolish. And by the way, when I raise China, I refer to the Chinese Communist Party, and not the millions of Australians of Chinese descent now in our country, descendants of those who came during the gold rushes almost 2 centuries ago, to those who immigrated recently. The Chinese Communist Party not only assesses other nations against China's values and standards, the Chinese Communist Party assesses our country against our values. And from that, it finds out, does our government have courage? Does our government have integrity? Do the politicians in this country and this parliament have the strength of character needed to lead a country? Now, Australian values, I've been thinking about this for some years now. I've made a list of Australian values: mateship, fair go, support, loyalty, being fair dinkum, telling the truth, honesty, fairness, freedom, freedom to live, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of religion, freedom of faith, freedom of interaction, freedom of exchange, democracy, our flag, our nation, family, care, respect for people, respect for community, respect for the law, respect for the environment. Making sure government fulfills its 3 primary roles: protecting life, protecting property and protecting freedom, and stays out of everything else. Our Constitution. We value our Constitution, especially competitive federalism, and we value human progress, and Australia has led that improvement and progress in the last 150 years. Amazing progress right across the world. So let's assess governments against these values and their impact on our productive capacity. Productive capacity depends on many things, but particularly energy costs, the primacy of energy. Ever-decreasing cost of energy has led to 150 years of human progress. But Australia has gone from the lowest electricity prices to the world's highest. And yet we're now the world's largest exporter of energy, gas and coal. Chinese import a lot of our coal, but their production of coal in their own country is 8 times our total production. Not just our exports, our total production. 8 times. They make us look like small producers of coal. They have the largest coal reserves in the world, along with the United States. They use our coal, and they're building steel power plants out of our coal, and they're building hundreds of coal-fired power stations. We legislate to use their wind turbines, their solar panels. We subsidise them. It drives up the cost of our electricity, and we pay them for their unreliables, their solar and wind generators. We pay them for the components for electric vehicles that we also subsidise. And then we have Chinese companies affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party owning electricity networks in our major cities. Then we have the Queensland Labor government stealing $1.5 billion a year through the generators. All of this destroys jobs, destroys competitiveness. And then taxpayers pay people, quite often foreigners, to come in and squat on the land just to get carbon dioxide credits. It's called carbon dioxide farming. But it takes good farmland and destroys it with noxious weeds and feral animals, pests. And then that has to be reclaimed at some later date, who knows when. Then we have Angus Taylor, the Minister for Energy, a farmer. He knows that the EPBCA Act is hurting him. And even though I've had conversations with him, he just smiles, rolls his eyes, and just puts up with it. He is a skeptic on climate change. He is a skeptic that we're affecting the climate. Yet he's being slammed, and he's now coming back into Parliament and driving up electricity prices. Matt Canavan, Barnaby Joyce, strong skeptics in their beliefs. Barnaby Joyce was the Deputy Prime Minister. The Chinese know that. They watch him. They saw him come into Cabinet, and they saw him go for election in New England when he moved out of the Senate into the lower house. And Malcolm Turnbull showered $400 million of taxpayer funds on unreliable wind power to get Mr. Joyce elected. And then Matt Canavan and Barnaby Joyce were both in the Cabinet, and they suddenly became alarmists, spouting the alarm due to our carbon dioxide. So I've asked Matt Canavan in the Senate one day, where's his evidence? And he just slid away from me. And now that he's out of Cabinet and Mr. Joyce is out of Cabinet, all of a sudden they're becoming a little bit sceptical again in their actions, in their words. But the Chinese Communist Party sees this, and that tells them a lot about the lack of leadership in this country. The Paris Agreement. The Chinese have their agreement with the Paris Agreement. It says we will continue doing whatever we want, continue growing our economy, continue constructing our country and developing our country and putting in place the infrastructure. And then in 2030, we may consider something. Meanwhile, this Parliament, this building, has legislated to destroy our economy to comply with Kyoto. That's not an agreement. That is stupidity and economic suicide. And then the Chinese watch us, the Chinese Communist Party watches us pay academics to tell lies about climate and to misrepresent the climate science. We even put some of them in charge in senior places in the CSIRO and pay them $800,000 a year to destroy our country. Dr. Andrew Johnson went from head of the Climate Research Agency department in the CSIRO to become head of Bureau of Meteorology. And under him and his predecessors, the Bureau of Meteorology has been shown to be concocting the data, misrepresenting the temperatures. We pay people like Ove Goldberg, Ian Chubb, past chief scientists. We pay them to destroy the science, misrepresent the science. Then we sign agreements in 1975 by Whitlam that says we'll comply with the Lima Declaration to shut down our manufacturing and export it. And then the following year, the Liberal Prime Minister Fraser ratified the deal. Then in 1992, Paul Keating's Labor government signed the Rio Declaration, which is about 21st century global governance. Then we had the Kyoto Protocol, destroying our country, stealing our farmers' property rights, and now the Paris Agreement. Exporting jobs, shutting manufacturing. And then the current Prime Minister has the temerity to say, we will fiddle with the industrial relations system to bring back manufacturing. How the hell can you bring back manufacturing with the highest electricity costs in the world, and manufacturing, big component of manufacturing now, the largest component usually, is electricity? How the hell can you do it with a tax system that favours multinational companies and lets them off scot-free? How the hell can you do it with over-regulation? How the hell can you do it with a lack of water? How the hell can you do it with a lack of infrastructure? The Chinese are watching this. And they're helping us destroy our electricity sector and export even more jobs. Because our prices for electricity are going up, businesses are shutting, and the jobs start up in China. We are now reversing the last 170 years of human progress. Reversing it. Because the key to human progress is decreasing prices of energy, which raises productivity, raises wealth, raises the standard of living. Ended in this country 20 years ago. 24 years ago. We have ceded governance to the UN, Lima, Kyoto, Rio, Paris, and many other agreements. How does this comply with Aussie values? How does it comply with being fair dinkum? And then worse, the granddaddy who concocted this climate change rubbish is Morris Strong, or was Morris Strong. He concocted it when he took over, when he created and then took over as head of the United Nations Environmental Programme. He pushed that starting in the 1970s. And in the 1980s ramped it up. In 1988 formed the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a fraudulent organisation. And Liberal, Labor, Nationals and the Greens have fallen for it all. Maurice Strong was a crook. He was wanted by the police in America and died in exile in China. And who's the beneficiary of all this destruction of Western civilization? The Chinese government. That's what the people in this chamber, the people in the chamber across the hall there, that's what they've done to this country by blindly following the UN dictates. How does that comply with our values? It doesn't. It breaks our values. What about water ownership? Destroyed. Separated water ownership from property ownership. What about the Murray-Darling Basin and the corruption that is rife? What about the farms, family farms shutting down? What about water projects? What water projects? That's it. There aren't any. And yet look at what amazing water projects the Chinese Communist Party has put together to develop its country. What about infrastructure? Hardly anything built. No plan. The north is exposed. The Bradfield scheme, we see floods destroying Townsville, destruction and waste of water flowing out to sea. We see the state governments joining in. Labor Party in Queensland, reef regulations, shutting down agriculture. Vegetation protection legislation, destroying agriculture. Fire breaks not being allowed, destroying it when farms are under fire. We put animals and fungus ahead of humans. Then the Queensland Labor government puts the Chinese company in charge of the electoral roll. Then we've got the Queensland Local Council corruption linked to the Labor state government. It extends well beyond Ipswich and Port Pasali. It is systemic, it is widespread. We've got foreign banks that were deregulated under John Howard, and we saw the result of that through the Hayne Royal Commission. We see Adani frustrated by both the Liberal National Government and the Labor government in Queensland and the federal government that was weak. And one man from India, a booming economy, a growing economy, wanted to spend $17 billion in our country, and he was thwarted for 8 years. That's a blight on us that not even the Chinese can miss, that no one in the world can miss. We go on and on and on. And Senator Rex Patrick, I give him credit for moving a motion to get an inquiry into the relationship between China and Australia. 6 times. And I support him every time. And both the Labor Party and the Liberal Nationals squashed it. This is what the Chinese are seeing. And yet Australians are wanting far more. Australians are wanting leadership. Australians are wanting security, reassurance, confidence, leadership, trust, pride and freedom. A restoration so we can be #1 in the world again. And what does it need? It needs principled leadership based on values. It needs disciplined leadership based on data and facts instead of ideology, paying off donors. It needs honest leadership and needs strength of character. The simple ability to say, I'm wrong, I'm sorry, can you help me, please explain. We need visionary policies, and that is what will take us back to being number one. Thank you.